Welcome to beautiful Chicago. It is currently 5:30 in the morning. So I'm so excited to be invited here, and hopefully I'm coherent. So today I wanted to talk about AI art making, because I know this is actually kind of the big elephant in the room right now, as we say in America, is the idea that there's something really big and weird is currently happening to us. We don't have a lot of choice over it, and how are you actually going to deal with the fact that we have so much different AI-powered kind of everything right now? So about me, I'm easily findable as Galaxy Kate at pretty much everything. I'm still on the Twitter site, but also Galaxy Kate at all sorts of different places. And I'm currently teaching at Northwestern University in Chicago. There we go. So about me, so I make little games, although I tend to never actually finish any of them. Certainly a common thing with game jams. I did finish one game though. I worked on a game called Spore that came out in 2007, way back when, although I'm actually having very few students who have still seen that game. So that kind of generation is passing. I also worked on SimCity. So I'm probably most recently famous for making tracery.js, which is a text generation tool. It's been ported to pretty much every language that you might want to use. There's certainly lots of Unity ports. It's been ported to 18 languages overall. So in case you wanted to use it in Lisp, you're welcome to do that. I also do a whole bunch of outreach for AI and creative computing. So as a person who's kind of been embedded in the idea of, ever since Spore and before Spore, the idea that okay, we can use computers to generate art. What the heck do we do now? So I've always been really engaged in trying to figure out okay, how do I go to people who AI wouldn't traditionally talk to, and make sure that I bring the technology that we're building to them in a way that they can use it. So I think of myself really much as a service position to a lot of the humanities. As part of that, I make a lot of these, you can see on the bottom right there, these are bot making merit badges. So if you make a bot, whatever you choose to define a bot as, even if it's just a puppet, and you want to award yourself one of these merit badges, you can go on my website and print out a sticker. So I also got my PhD in, and congratulations to our previous speaker on getting his PhD. I got my PhD in basically casual creativity, or how AI can support people being creative who are not great at creativity, but just kind of people playing Jackbox games and other kind of fun doodling adventures. And again, can be found at Galaxy Kate at all the things. So my research really took kind of an interesting trajectory over the years, because I've been here for a while, I guess, 23 years. All right, cool. So in the early 2000s, I was really interested in this idea of what we first call kind of simulation. So I was looking at a lot of The Sims and Civilization and other games that I played a lot of, and thinking okay, wow, we encode a lot of our world in these simulations. And when we encode our world, especially in things the first couple of versions of the Civilization, we encode a whole bunch of really weird choices. We don't include things a city being able to have fresh water to drink, or having sewer systems, but we do include things polytheism is a prerequisite to monotheism, which is a strict upgrade over polytheism. So, strange choices about how we put things into our game universes, all of which are very political and very opinionated, and are all just different caricatures of the world. And then I got really into okay, when we have these interesting models of the world, we can actually encode what it is to be an artist. So we can encode what it is to make fabric. So I make different pattern fabrics, which hopefully y'all can see on the stream. These are all made with generators, actually very similar technology to the stuff that I was making on Spore. So it's okay, well, what does it mean to teach a computer or encode what it is for me to design fabric into a computer so the computer can do it? And that was neat. It's kind of magical. You can push a button and you get new art out. So you can push a button, get art. That was great. And then I started realizing, as I looked at a bunch of these other apps for people being creative, actually it's much more interesting not just to have the human's job is to push the button and the computer's job is to make the art, but to actually have the computer and the human creating things together. So, again, things like interactive creators, or, if the computer could just generate you an avatar in your game, that's actually much less fun than maybe generating you an avatar and having you fuss with it, or just generating you a random avatar and you get to choose kind of the process of making the avatar is your own, you, the human, are the one having pleasure there. Excuse me. And then especially during the pandemic, even before the pandemic, I really got into the idea that like, okay, creativity is actually about how people socialize with each other. There's a great book called Making is Connecting, which is about not just like creativity on a computer, but things like hacker spaces and quilting bees. If anybody does pottery wheel, like how do we create, and then how do we create with other people? Like, why is it really fun to kind of be working in or around a group? And so that translated really well to the pandemic because, of course, we were all playing like Jackbox games. We were all playing kind of weird internet toys that allowed us to be like physically present and creating with each other, even when we weren't like physically present. And of course, VR keeps trying to do this and doing a really terrible job at it. But it was really interesting to kind of think about, okay, creativity is how we socialize with each other. So we could actually make AI tools that help you socialize through creativity. And this being kind of like okay, from computers storing things to computers making things to humans and computers making things together to a computer helping two humans improve their connection by creating things. This is kind of the trajectory of my work. And so as part of that, I wanted to kind of like start clearing the air with a few things that I'm not going to address during this talk, but that are important when we're talking about like this AI generated everything thing that's going on. Oops, I wish I had a clock somewhere on my computer. There we go. Okay. So AI generated everything is here. So a couple of different things are true. So as we know, as many people know, most of these models were trained. A couple of people trained their own models on their own materials. So there's an artist called Helena Sarin, who's a ceramicist. She trains her work on her own pottery and uses that to generate. So that's not part of this. But most of the models that you hear about are trained on material that was gained without permission. So that may be illegal or it may not be. It may be unethical, and like people fall on kind of both sides of those. But either way, when companies make money off of your work without choice or compensation, it feels really bad. So a lot of people, regardless of illegality or ethics, are feeling really bad. We are also, this is like a big economics thing. We are about to see a lot of devaluation of art making skills. We're going to see a lot of jobs disappear, especially in art, or get really weird. So like possibly you won't be the one using Photoshop anymore. You will be like selecting computer generated stuff, which feels like not what you got into art for. Interestingly, it's not just you. The same thing is also happening to other industries, everything from telemarketers to lawyers and software engineers. There's a lot of when people talk about this, they're like, oh, well, there's been lots of times in history where entire jobs got obsoleted. So, things like fabric weavers, and, there used to be orchestras that performed with music, orchestras that performed during movies. And when we had sound films, suddenly that entire job of being an orchestra that played with at the movie theater was gone. This is one of the first times that a whole bunch of very expensive professions, people who have a lot of social capital, like the entire software industry, is starting to feel the threat from this. So we'll see if maybe we have a different outcome because of that. This is also going to cause a lot of really nasty disruption, not like of the art that we're making, but actually of like economic situations. Like if a lot of people who have suddenly if you invest 30 years in getting really good at software engineering or art, and suddenly you're told that your comfortable lifestyle is no longer viable, and you do that to one person and it's sad, and you do that to 2/3 of your population, and suddenly you get some like really weird political stuff going on. Historically, when people become unprofitable to a society, there's a lot of really bad stuff that kicks in. So we'll have to worry about all of this, but this is not what the talk is. And if you want to know more about these kinds of things, there's an article that goes really deep into this. It's really fantastic. This is the theme is, if we want to understand how art will evolve in the future, we won't talk about these socioeconomic concerns, which are very valid as artistic judgments. So it can be true that this thing is awful and going to cause political instability and cause people's lives to be wasted. That doesn't mean that it's making ugly art. And if you say that it makes ugly art, it doesn't actually change the other thing. So we'll be kind of looking at these things as they are, not like outside of all this economic stuff. Okay, so with that aside, what do you do when there's something scary and powerful and you can't stop it? As we know from media, so here's this is an ML generated dragon that somebody made. This is made with a previous generation of Midjourney, which is one of the more popular art generators. So imagine there's a big, scary mechanical dragon coming at you. What movies tell us that we should do then is you ride the dragon through the power of friendship and understanding. So it's important to actually understand these tools, kind of befriend them in some way, so that then you can be in charge of the big, scary thing. And then hopefully you can direct it to be like less destructive, or at least have fun with you. So a little bit of kind of what role can these things play in our lives? So a lot of the media right now is kind of both people for and against are talking kind of like this. Okay, like an art is a thing. There is such a thing as an art, and we humans can make art. AI can also make art. Therefore, we're going to compare the art that humans make and the art that AIs make. And when AI makes better art, then the AI has won and humans are obsolete. And unfortunately, it seems like we're, relatively close to that point. Certainly, the AIs are making art already better than almost every human. So, all right, it can not only make good art, but it can make an infinite space of art tirelessly and on demand. So when you are sleeping, it is still able to generate like 500 arts per minute. So obviously you can't, there's none of us that can beat this at its own game. Even if you're the greatest painter in the world, you can't paint that fast. So therefore the AI wins, we should all pack up and no longer do art. And also we're seeing that like the audiences and the employers are starting to side with the AI as well. So this is every time somebody says like, oh, an AI is winning an art competition, and we all freak out, or somebody is going to use AI in their video game instead of hiring artists, we're like, oh no, they're voting with their money and their love for the AI and not for the human artists. Like, this is really bad. And so again, people like react very like understandably negatively to this. So what I'm pitching is, what if we are not in fact competing with the AI? That the AI is now a very different kind of artist than humans ever were because it can make so much stuff. And that we, like, the dragon is stronger than people, but we're going to figure out like what to do with this. So the AI, like, we can no longer think about the AI produces as a single art. It's not producing an art, it's producing a fluid space of art. By the way, all these cats are cats that I personally generated in Midjourney. So I had a lot of fun generating these cats about a year ago. And it was really fun to just kind of explore the space. So AI is like producing a fluid space of art. It's producing not only the space of kind of like all of the different like blue swirly cats that I was making, but also all the other different like strange art that other people are making. Midjourney actually has a really interesting Discord where you can see all the different things that people are generating on Midjourney. So it's like, again, it goes from like the computer is generating stuff to I am generating stuff with the computer by iterating through these prompts to our whole Discord is generating stuff together, and we're all kind of bouncing off of each other. Like, we're all socializing on the Discord through generating stuff with Midjourney. So it's interesting that even that tool kind of took this journey. So it's producing a fluid space of art, like both my small fluid space and the larger fluid space, like the larger ocean of art. So what I think is that what's happening now is this art is liquid rather than solid. So these are terms that I'm coining because they allow me to actually like think through what the heck is going on here. And again, I don't have a clock, so I don't get to like see what time it is. There we go. Okay. So what's important here is that in this space, we're starting to see that no particular piece of art matters. There may be a cat picture that I like better. So there were, like, these are of all the cat pictures that I generated, I probably generated 3 times as many. These are the ones that I like saved because I thought they were particularly good. But if you deleted any one of these from my hard drive, I would actually not be too upset. And if you like switched one of them out without me noticing to a slightly different cat, I probably also wouldn't notice. That's kind of weird because like if you switched out the Mona Lisa with a slightly different Mona Lisa, I bet people would notice. But here, like the fact that, no drop of water in this ocean matters. The ocean certainly matters, and the fact that there are drops in it matters, but any particular drop is not in itself kind of an art. So we can think of ourselves as like standing, like instead of standing trying to compete with the ocean, so we don't have to outperform the ocean. We can take on a new role of kind of the surfer on the ocean. So our goal in this case is not to, outmake the art. So we're not making more art than this, but we're going to find ways to make this giant ocean meaningful. That they're like the drops themselves may not be meaningful, but the drops that make up the wave that I'm surfing suddenly I own that interaction with this space. So we can also, this is fun, you can also kind of use it as glue in your own art. So there's nothing that stops you from saying, okay, this is a system. I'm going to use this system to kind of like augment my art, or I'm going to draw on top of it, or I'm going to collage it. We've seen a lot of people kind of making comic books with it, where they take some generated stuff and some of their own stuff. Even just a simple act of curation, like, okay, you generate 100,000 cats, and I'm going to pick the ones that I think are good. And often we will start like making stories or connections. So again, you're thinking of like surfing this wave. It's like, my journey is not a single drop of water. It's not finding the best drop of water in the ocean, but finding the path through all those like kind of individual drops of water. So we see a lot of people kind of like narrativizing their path through the space. So like, okay, this is what I was starting to generate, and this is what I ended up generating. An exercise that I think is really fun is try to draw a portrait of yourself, not using a photo of yourself, but just using like what you think is a description of kind of your avatar. And I found that really fun because as I went, like there were a lot of pictures that didn't feel like they were of me in some sense. If you take a picture of my face, that looks like my face, but what actually mattered to me was like, okay, it's got pink glasses. It's holding a coffee. It's got like a certain body type. So I was able to kind of hone in on like, almost like a Catholic saint has their kind of like symbols that make up what that saint is. I found that like, oh, I have certain attributes that make a picture of me or not of me. So that was kind of an interesting introspective exercise of like that journey through this possibility space. And of course, once you make these like collations and curations and annotations and augmentations, you can still have an audience that like pays you in money and love. So you, this human, can still be producing art with the AI. The term for this is often a there's a couple of terms. Especially in chess, because chess was one of the first ones that kind of wrangled with being outdone by a computer. So it turns out that a chess computer can beat a human. We all know this. But it turns out if you combine a human with an AI system, so you have the AI system suggesting moves to the human and the human picking them, it actually then outperforms the AI. So the chess terms for this are either cyborg or my personal favorite, centaur. So you can be a centaur with the AI. So a half human, half AI creature of art making. So you can still be this and still be an artist, whatever that means to you. So these are my terms. And again, this is just something that like helped me think through what's going on here. It's been super productive over the past 6 months when I've had this terminology, and the world has been changing a lot. So again, solid art, it's an art of mostly fixed form. It's collectible, it's separable. I can say that this is the Mona Lisa, this is not the Mona Lisa. I can even say this is a Xerox copy of the Mona Lisa, this is a postcard of the Mona Lisa, this is not a postcard of the Mona Lisa, and this is a postcard, and this is the original. So all these things are like reasonable things to say. Liquid art gets really weird because there's no single, again, center one. It's a space of potential artifacts. So we move through it by like surfing, filtering. You often experience it not as a single artifact, but as we see in things like Midjourney, like people rarely just post one, they'll post like 4 in a row. It's experienced through streams or overwhelming waves of content. So like that's an experience that we can't get with normal art usually. We can't get like a wave of paintings unless they've been accumulated over many years. So my pitch here is that maybe we need to start thinking of the artifact, like the single art, as dead. Like maybe that one has kind of in some ways gone away. But what we have instead, and I'm not saying that all the paintings in your house just disappeared, all that remains is our experience of them. Welcome to the world of liquid art. So fortunately, we're not the first humans to combine our own generated art with other art. So we can think of like, okay, the history of humans making art with systems. So things like, repetition. This is a cave painting from 7000 BC. So it's one of the oldest paintings that we have with all the hands. And this is the idea that like, hey, this is actually made by many humans over thousands of years, all adding their hands. But you can see that they're using the same sort of like system to make handprints. And creating something like generated out of like many people as a social activity. And then we also have this thing over here. This is one of my favorite vases in the world. It's not particularly spectacular, but I really like that this is like very early on in ceramics, and I do ceramics. And humans have figured out how to, I suspect this was made on a pottery wheel, so they figured out how to use that. And then they've also figured out how to do stamping. So they've made a little stamp and they stamped multiple times. So again, that's neat. We are the monkey that discovered patterns, and we just loved it. And so like not only do we make patterns, but then you can see they're like hand drawing these lines in between the patterns. So they're like adding their own touch to make these patterns more meaningful. The patterns themselves were kind of like a little bland, and so they jazzed it up a bit. And then we often make stories or connections. So we have, if anybody plays tarot, tarot is all about like, okay, I have a tarot spread, and then I, the human, start making up stories about this thing that the system has given me. Of course, we would never say like, and again, this is the liquid art thing. I would never say, oh, I'm going to sell you my tarot spread. These were the 3 cards that I drew, so I'm going to sell you that. I might sell you the story that was based on my tarot spread. That might be different. But the individual tarot spread, it's like I could always just draw another one and another one and another one. A tarot spread is the ocean. And of course, there's just like, you know, if anybody does crafts, especially fiber arts, there's just a ton of different like ways that we have used systems to make art. And then often these arts get combined in other forms. So one trick here is that we don't actually have patterns for liquid art yet. We've certainly been making like liquid-like art for a really long time, as with the tarot example. But like a lot of our art is just kind of, when we think about like, oh, what is it to be an artist? It's all solid art. So we think about things like museums, where it's like, okay, who has the Mona Lisa? Who has different kinds of art? Like what individual pieces does your art have? And we should apparently space all of them exactly 4 feet apart on walls. That is the optimum spacing for solid art, for maximum appreciation. Galleries, similarly, like you can have just a gallery in your home. You can you can curate art, you can collect art, you can create your own art and put on a show of individual arts that you have made. We also have things like pieces that are owned. So a solid art can be owned by somebody, or this is often a very like a photograph can be a very liquid experience because I can make as many copies of a photograph as I want. So that's starting to go from solid to liquid. And then they often turn it back. So it's like, okay, this one only has 10 editions. So now, okay, I've taken my like slightly liquid space and turned it firmly back into solid so that I can sell it. More galleries. We saw this with the whole like NFT debacle, where NFTs, those generators, are a very liquid space. So a good computer generator can generate like a cool space of things. Any particular generation of a generator is not interesting. But they said that won't do because we want to sell these things. So we're going to have to like, okay, each one has a seed, each one is purchasable. We're going to try to like put a lot of and like, notice how quickly they fell back on all the old solid art patterns. It's like, we're going to put these in museums and galleries. You're going to own them. You're going to have editions of some small number, some countable number at least. And so they like had to turn this all back to solid art. I often call this like, there are reasons to do solid art captures of liquid art spaces, but I call these dead butterflies. So a lot of times when museums collect a piece of digital art, they'll save off some select number of copies, like some select number of seeds, kind of as like solid art representations, because museums are really good at like keeping solid art for 1,000 years. So they're really bad at like keeping a digital artifact working for 10 years. So sometimes you just have to keep it as solid art so that it can last for the next generation. So that's fine. So do we have patterns for liquid art yet? Maybe. It turns out actually, like, aside from like traditional forms of human crafting, games and generative art have been dealing with this for a while. So if anybody has played Spore way back in the day, so Spore, we had millions and millions of creations. This was a screen capture just a couple of years ago. So this is like 15 years after the game came out. And you can see that like we have 190 million creations that have been uploaded. That's just uploaded. We don't know the ones that people have not like connected to the internet to upload. So that's pretty cool. Like you can actually have this enormous space of creativity, even for small niche products like Spore. And it's not just like digital. Again, any sufficient like, or it's not just like generator maybe. Any sufficiently large art spaces start to have liquid properties. So I'll talk about things like Pinterest, where it's like, okay, not much stuff on Pinterest is computer generated, but there's so much of it that it actually ends up feeling like this kind of like endless soup of content that you get with a generator. So whenever you have like endless content that in itself, like each individual might be interesting or might not be, but in its whole form, it starts to feel like soup, that's a liquid generator. So I personally make a whole bunch of like weird little art experiments. So like, here's this generator that I used to generate that fabric, drawing tools, animation tools. This one on the right is a mask that I use for like VTuber stuff. So I make all these, and it like gives me the ability to quickly experiment on these kinds of ideas. And if you want to make these things, I have a whole bunch of resources. So I have a lot of zines. So you can go to my site and find all of my zines. They're all free. You can also go on itch.io, on GalaxyCade at itch.io, and you can also find the zines and stickers there, where they're also free, or you can pay me money if you want. And then a lot of my research was kind of on this stuff about people making art badly with systems for what's called the autotelic pleasure. The idea that like you can make pottery because you need bowls. As a potter, I do not make pottery because I need bowls. I can't find enough people to take all the pottery that I make. I'm making pottery for the pleasure in itself, autotelic pleasure. And the bowls are merely a side effect of this. And so I spent my graduate career like figuring this stuff out. I nailed it pretty hard, I think. And I call them casual creators, things like Jackbox games, pottery wheels, etc. And I've given a lot of different talks on this. So if you want to like learn more about that, you can search for casual creators, Kate Compton, and find all sorts of different videos that I've made. I also, because I do so much bot making on Twitter, it's really interesting to look at like Twitter bots as a really great pattern for liquid art. These are like little bots. They can post on Twitter as much or as little as you like. And so we start seeing things like, okay, this bot will post a whole bunch of things. Not many of them will be interesting, but every so often it'll post one that's really funny and people will retweet that. So this idea like, okay, this bot is creating a very small ocean of content, and we're all noticing that a particular piece of that ocean is very sparkly and taking pictures of it and sharing it with our friends. And I got a really nice article on that kind of work just recently in The Atlantic, so you can also check out that Atlantic article about generative art is stupid and that's how it should be. This is actually very not anti-ML, but saying that like, so most of my work, all of this stuff, this does not use like modern forms of machine learning, all those like scary models. This is mostly just like processing and a bunch of if statements. This is just like small games programming to make art. So it's not like the big ML stuff. You can make this stuff as well. So he's kind of falling down on the side of like a lot of this stuff is small and charming, and actually the like these tiny ponds that it makes instead of vast oceans are also beautiful. So nice thing about if you have a small generator, that makes it very easy to experiment. So I make a lot of tree generators. If you've ever used an L system to make a tree, if you're doing a game jam, making an L system tree generator is really a solid project. It's a very straightforward method. You have like a little recursive method that creates a branch and then branches that branch and branches that branch and branches that branch and branches that branch until it gets to a certain size and it stops. And then you've got blammo, you've got a tree. Everybody has made one of these. You don't have to worry about that you're unique because everybody has made their first painting of a tree, and that's okay. We have not exhausted the space of tiny bad paintings of trees. You can absolutely make a tiny bad tree generator for your project. So I like making these because they're a really great exercise to do a bunch of different stuff. So these are all like the one at the bottom here. This is my tree generator. I have it running at parties sometimes. You can like pick out your favorite tree, and then it'll like plant more variations of that, so you can like slowly explore this tree space. And the way that works is you have like, it's got about 20 parameters that define how these flowers grow. Everything from like what color they are to how long the stems are before they branch to how many petals are on the flower, to like how much the color shifts over time on the leaves versus the flowers. So like 20 different parameters that do that. That's really nice because then you can think of this as a 20-dimensional cube. So if I had just like 3 parameters, you can imagine it as like a 3-dimensional cube, which you can fit in your head. And then each one of these points in the cube, so if it's like 1, 1, 0, and I had a 3-dimensional, 3-parameter flower generator, you can imagine that there's like many, like each point in the space is a different flower. That allows you to do all kinds of different space. So this is like a very liquid space because I can say, okay, if I like this plant and this plant, then I can like actually like find the midpoint. If I can find the midpoint, I can actually like find at any time t through this kind of parametric line, and then I can like animate between one flower and another. So like there's modes in this kind of little toy app that I make that allow you to like merge from flower to flower, and that's pretty fun. So I can kind of like, all right, I like this flower, but it's only one drop in the ocean, so I'm going to go surf over to this way or surf over to that way. You can even do random paths that let you just kind of like randomly squiggle through the space. You can draw Bezier curves in n dimensions and then animate along them. So lots of fun different things. This is a project from somebody else, Ken Stanley et al. He does a lot of work in this space. He made a flower generator that ran on Facebook for a number of years. And the idea was, okay, I want to make a game out of this space. So mine was just like a little doodly app that you could like have vibing at parties. But he said, okay, we want to make a game. We're game makers. We want to have something that you can like be winning or losing at. We want to have goals. How do you make goals out of this? blammo. You just take landmarks in this space. So he selected a bunch of random landmarks and said, these are the flowers that you want to collect. You can get to those flowers by breeding other flowers. So you're basically just like trying to find different points in this space by taking 2 flowers and finding the midpoint. And every time you manage to do that, one of these little flowers lights up, and suddenly you've got the Pokemon collect them all with just finding points in the space. Great liquid art pattern. This is another paper that did like pretty much the entire like speed run through everything you can do in this space. It came out in about 2008, so it's like, you know, relatively early. They in fact have an L system tree generator because, you know, it's the hello world of generativity. It's like always works for you. So I said, okay, we got a parametric space of trees, just like mine. It's like n different parameters. So like some n-dimensional cube. I said, okay, we can give people landmarks. We're going to give people kind of starting normal landmark trees. So like trees that they expect, and then people can kind of navigate out from there. And then in their paper, they also said, okay, and these are trees that our users found. So our users managed to find these trees. And the users could actually like mark space. So the users could provide their own landmarks. And you can see like, all right, how far from landmarks am I? So you can say like, okay, I'm enjoying making trees, but I actually want to get weirder. So like teleport me to a space with no landmarks in it. So I can make the liquid art space of saying like, okay, if there's a bunch of points over here, find me a point that's far away from this. And again, people are doing this sort of thing with like this, like, am I close to other content? Am I far away from other content? Subtract, like find me the midpoint between 2 pieces of content. Find me the content that I would get that if I subtract the Mona Lisa from Van Gogh, what is on the far side of that? So you can kind of like slingshot yourself almost with like a Zelda like arrow mechanic of like pull back and send me over to the other side of content. So you can get people doing that. This was, they said, you know, what's just randomly in our space, not the stuff that people actually go to. So if you imagine the space is like, okay, people kind of make paths between like the normal looking trees and sometimes little paths off to the side towards cacti. But like if we randomly sampled this mountain of space, what is there? And this is just kind of a random sample. These are random samples from the space, and these are random samples from places that people have explored. So you can see like, okay, there's definitely a weird space out there, and there's definitely like kind of like civilized space. You know, like space that people have like kind of made paths through is like the normal trees. So you can understand a lot about this space, which is a wonderful liquid art move of just like, hey, how do I understand this space? A couple of other patterns that I like, just so I make sure that I end reasonably on time. This idea, and again, this is kind of an abstract one, of translation between spaces. So if I got my n-dimensional cube, or however you're representing your content, I could say like, okay, if for every piece of this content, there is some piece of other content, or if for some other content, there's a piece in my space. I can make these kind of interesting translation things. This is not a terribly successful piece, but this is something that somebody used. You can get these vector embeddings of words, which say like, okay, if you mapped all of the words in English onto an n-dimensional cube, such that like puppy and dog were together, or cat and kitten were together, and map all the words, like where are all the words in this space? Where would you put all the words in the space? And you turn them into basically an n-dimensional vector of words. So that's cool, because now I can turn words into flowers if I wanted to. This is somebody translating words into like little squiggly things, and you can see that it actually like doesn't give you any additional information in this particular example. But you can also do different kinds of encodings. There's a poet, Alison Parrish, who's done a really cool vector encoding. If you need to do poetry stuff, it's a vector encoding of pronunciations. So instead of puppy and dog being together, puppy and poppy and kitty are together, because all those have kind of the same sounds. She did a fun experiment of what is if you took puppy and kitty as points in the space, and you found the center point between puppy and kitty is committee. So that's calculations that you can do on that. Again, very liquid art. She does a lot of like liquid art poetry readings where she'll take a poem and then have her generators like deform it and create like an emergent space of poems that she's moving through dynamically. So again, very liquid art moves. You have these goofy, you also have, oh, and this down here is a music visualizer I made. So I made a parametric generator. And then it turns out if you take music and you turn music into, you can turn music into buckets of numbers. This is a fast Fourier transform. Most languages have a library for it. So you get your fast Fourier transform of all the buckets of your music. And then you turn that directly into your object. And then you have a music visualizer. That's all. Like that's it. It's an instant music visualizer. And it works spectacularly well. And then there's all these other things where it's like, we've all seen different products where it's like, oh, take your baby's first word, record as an audio, and then we're going to like turn that into a little physical artifact. So you can like translate between spaces. The idea here is that like, there are many like essentially identical necklaces like this, but this one belongs to you because this is your baby's first words. Curation, again, super powerful. We can see up here, this is just like one of my many Pinterest boards. This is just one that I collected of all the different ways there are to draw water. So whenever I see somebody drawing or representing water in some different way, I collect this for this board. So this is me kind of curating something that I'm interested in about. Other people have boards for like particular moments in their lives or dreams that they have. So there's a lot of different things that you can curate for. Like the curation itself, the creating your strange small personal gallery can be, in fact, its own moment of expression. This one down here was a game that was not super successful, but I liked what it was trying to do. It was called Occupy White Walls, and they had a crap ton of Creative Commons art. So they had a bunch of like classical art that was out of copyright, and they had a bunch of like art that they had scraped from like maybe DeviantArt or something that was tagged as like Creative Commons use. And then you could like pick up any piece of that and like create your little kind of Second Life gallery of it. And then like random bots could come in and see that art. So yeah, that's like different art that you can make. We see a lot of narration. So like if you have a giant liquid art space, people kind of doing curation sports. Like who is the best curator on Pinterest? There probably actually is somebody. But just like, people enjoying making different curations. A lot of people do like streams where they make different Sims characters. Narration, we get a lot of different narration. If anybody's playing Dwarf Fortress has traditionally like only existed. Dwarf Fortress is a terrifying liquid space of stories. You cannot survive in this ocean. This is like the Nordic Ocean, like terrifying, like 60-foot ice waves of generative space. You personally cannot navigate that, but a lot of people will go in there and then come back and tell stories of what they've kind of seen in this terrifying space. So a lot of like, you'll see a lot of patterns of like narration around like, okay, this was my journey through this generative space. We also get a lot of fan fiction tagging, just like people, okay, there's a giant space. So how am I going to annotate this space in some way? And again, like any sufficiently large space can be liquid. So the space of fan art in AO3 can be can be used. Also collage, we think of collage as definitely like a physical thing, but like we can collage any media. So again, speaking of very large spaces, people are collaging TikToks. So the whole like shanty TikTok thing is the idea that like, okay, one person is singing a shanty and another person takes that and kind of adds onto it. And another person takes that and adds onto it. So we're having kind of a multiplayer quilt of very large content. Anytime you see people kind of posting like YouTube videos where they've like taken a bunch of movie clips and collaged them into like some almost like piecework quilt, that's kind of, again, working in this like infinite generative space, but then they're taking the too big space and clipping it out and kind of making their own composition out of it. And then, of course, one of my favorites, collaborative space annotation, the idea that just like, okay, my path through the space is interesting. Okay, so because I have very few minutes left because the last guy went into mine a bit. But okay, so I'll just go quickly through some problems. So one of the problems with infinite content is that like it lacks aura. And this has been ever since we can reproduce content. And so the idea here is like, okay, if we have like photocopies of the Mona Lisa, does the original Mona Lisa lack value? And then if we can make a space of Mona Lisas, like, and all of those are like kind of like there's one drop in the ocean that's Mona Lisa's, is any particular part of this valuable? So I coined a term for this, which is the Bach faucet. And this is coined after an actual thing that happened. So the idea is Bach music is rare. So you have some system that can generate infinite Bach. And actually this happened circa, what was it, 1997 or so? This musician, David Cope, he made a Bach generator. He tested it with actual Bach theorists or like Bach scholars. And they verified that it was like, probably C minus Bach. So, all right, he can make infinite Bach. So you can appreciate, like, so Bach made a lot of music, and you can appreciate it in exactly 0.04% of a human lifespan on average. So that's how long it takes you to appreciate Bach. So if he had, and this article is 1997, this book is great because it's like, okay, everything that we're seeing now of like, what if we make infinite art? What the heck is going to happen? He has already gone there, seen what happens, and reported back. So it turns out you can make infinite Bach now, and you can fill lifetimes with any sort of Bachish music. So you could create 100 Bach seconds per second. So you could have as many more Bach seconds than 1,000 people could appreciate. But we still live at 1 second per second. So now we have to evaluate the time it takes to perceive stuff. So we cannot, in fact, actually appreciate all of this Bach. So how do we deal with this? We still just experience things. So one thing about the space is that any particular space may not be memorable. So the term I coined for this a while back is the 10,000 bowls of oatmeal problem. Just the idea that okay, these things are all technically unique, but because this is such a liquid space, none of them are perceptually unique. You can tell me that all these bowls of oatmeal are mathematically distinct, but I still just perceive them as all one bowl of oatmeal. So this is a common phrase that people use whenever you have a generative space where you can't actually the things in it are all very samey. So how do we solve this? So my final pitch is think about art as a noun. So this is our kind of classic solid art move. So there are great operas in this world. So I used to run an opera night with my grad school friends where we would just watch an opera and eat snacks, just on video. And so these are some of the greatest operas in the world. But these are my favorite operas. Why are they my favorite operas? Not because they're the greatest in the world, although they were good entertainment, but because for each one of them, I had some story. There was something, some role that they filled in my life. So this is art as a verb. This is art that is your experience of the art. So even though these arts are a noun to other people, these arts to me were a verb. They were a way of, and notice how many of these were about me spending time with other people. These arts were all a social moment with friends, and that's why they're precious to me. And some art, not every art becomes precious to a lot of people. Certainly famous art gets seen by more people, and so it becomes more of I'm sure a lot of people's first dates were at La Traviata. There's a whole movie about it, Moonstruck, where they go to see La Boheme as a first date. We've got plenty of this stuff. But each of those kind of are experienced as an individual experience. So I'll leave it there, where the idea is that okay, you can make these huge generators, and don't worry about the generator itself outdoing you, because what you're going to do as a game designer is make the surfers. A skier doesn't feel like they're in competition with the mountain. You are designing, there is some mountain, and you, the game designer, are trying to, maybe you've created that mountain out of your own generator. Maybe it's a mountain that exists in this other commercial generator, but your job as a designer is to say, okay, the experience matters. How am I going to make an experience for people to move through this AI space? And hopefully those patterns that I showed you give you a couple of options. How am I going to make this experience, and how am I going to make people kind of, again, befriend and ride this dragon? How am I going to make this not a scary dragon coming at them, but a dragon that they are they have a personal connection to and they feel in control of? Okay, so that's my pitch for what you can work on for your game generator, for your game jam, and hope that was useful to I don't know, make you feel better about this whole horrible dragon that's coming to kill us all. So yeah, any questions?
Thank you, Kate. I hope you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your talk. I feel like that we've gone to future and then come back. There's so many different trajectories that we are now on, it seems. And the thing is kind of live, happening. There's so many things that we can do with this. I love your definition. There was also a comment in chat that people love your definition of liquid art and how to work with that. That I can't help myself on asking, since there is solid art and liquid art, will there be something like gas and plasma? I guess.
That's a good question. Yeah. Yeah, what doesn't even, if liquid art is something that we can at least stand on and surf, what is something that we can no longer notice because it's something we're inhaling and exhaling?
Yeah. Is it actually already here? I guess I'm not an art theorist, but then there's another question from me is that that came actually from the students or the audience, is that in terms of your definition of liquid art, does it apply also to analog or physical things like maybe live art or graffiti or something like that? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Again, I kind of often experience like my own pottery as a very liquid art form because there's certainly pots that I vibe with, but a lot of it is just kind of like, I'm collaborating. Like when I'm making a pot, I'm collaborating with this wheel, and like it is a very liquid art form. Like if anybody does pottery, you actually feel the clay flowing between your hands, and so there I'm like just exploring different like shapes of this pot, and so I'm just kind of like moving through it, and then at some point I stop playing with the liquid generator and I have to like put it in the kiln and make it into a solid, so it can then like put cereal in it. You can't put cereal in a solid generator, but yeah, no, there's a lot of physical, like anything that has so many possibilities starts feeling more and more liquid. So certainly, like you can only move through about 3 pot shapes before your pot collapses. Um, but but it's like kind of moving in that direction. So anything where you've got just massive amounts of stuff, like if you've ever been into a museum basement and you see that like, okay, the like 1,000 artifacts that they have on the first floor are actually a tiny fraction of these 6,000 very bland artifacts that they have in their collection. And you see like, oh, art is actually like this much more massive space, like
Yeah.
art or archaeology is a much more massive space of like pot shards and missing arms,
Yeah.
than I had actually considered by looking at all kind of the solid stuff up above.
Did we have a question from the audience? There's one from Mr. Professor Kuckelsberger.
Hey Kate, Christian Kuckelsberger here. Really nice to see you online. Real shame not to have you here. Because your talk was really super thought-provoking, and I wish we could discuss all that stuff offline. But so I would just
I'm
stick
just
to
happy to chat on Twitter or just like a Zoom call or whatever.
sure thing. I just stick to one question. So on the one hand, you, if I understand correctly, you defined liquid art as something where like that one individual piece, that one drop in the ocean doesn't have much meaning. On the other hand, you did talk about that one pattern of curation where we pick like one bit that somehow fits into our collection, therefore somehow makes meaning to us. That strikes me as some form of contradiction. Could you clarify?
Yeah, I think it's that the meaning is not in the drop. The meaning is in our relationship to it. So there's some number of moon rocks on Earth, some that have fallen through meteorites, some that have been collected through NASA space missions, and those rocks are incredibly precious. The moon is filled with these rocks. So on the moon, this is liquid art. You can pick up any moon rock, but as soon as it's like taken that journey, you could switch out that moon rock with any other moon rock and we probably wouldn't notice. And yet that moon rock is in a museum because it's kind of made this journey with us. And we see this in actually, like, this is a fun psychology experiment that they've done a lot of times where you have interest psych students do some survey and you reward them with a poster. And then you either randomly assign them a poster or they get to pick the poster. And then you ask them months later, like, how do they feel about that poster? And it turns out, regardless of how people started out feeling about that poster, once that poster has gone through 6 months of life with them, suddenly it's like every fantasy movie you've ever seen. It's like when you go on a 6-month journey with somebody, you become fast friends afterwards, regardless of the person that they actually are. So we pair bond with people and pets and objects really easily. So I think a lot of these things it's not that this drop in the ocean was important, but that I put it in a little vial of water and I took it back as like a symbol of my vacation. And suddenly that drop of water is very precious to me. So I think that's kind of like these operas, some of these operas are more important than, like, they are the prettiest drop of water in the ocean, but also they're an important part of my life. So I think that's the bit that makes it not a contradiction. It's like, yes, these things have they may or may not have internal qualities that make them different, but the thing that really, really makes them different is our kind of lived experience with them that makes them of value.
I think that's a great place to stop. We're a little bit over time. Thank you, Kate, for so much for waking up so early in Chicago. And hope to see you in person in Finland, hopefully, soon somewhere.
Yeah, I would love to travel out there. I've never been.
Okay, thank you.